Hey, my name is Jason Miller. I wrote a little book called Second Skim Tales and Truths from the Mosh Pit of Life. And happiness for me is heavy metal, a heavy metal live concert, probably, I think, including Quiet Riot, who I just saw last week. So that is happiness to me.
Quiet Riot, huh? So I
Yeah.
remember Come On Feel the Noise and
The
Ma Ma
the
Ma, We're All Crazy Now, right?
those were definitely in the set. The first heavy metal album to ever debut on Billboard's #1 spot in 1983. They were celebrating the 40th anniversary of Metal Health. The first album I ever purchased with my own money. Took me several weeks to save up my allowance. I probably just gave away my age.
Well, we're the same age. I remember in '83, I remember my nephew, who happened to be the same age as me, because my step nephew, because my mom married an older man. He got Metal Health on album, and then
Yeah,
his mom promptly converted that to 8-track and a cassette, so that we had it everywhere we could possibly want it.
that is actually happiness. That I should have said that. And
Right? Uh-oh. And hit me again, Jason. I lost you there, brother.
oh,
You should have
sorry.
said that was happiness. Why?
I said happiness, old school analog. I think everything coming back. 8 tracks, vinyl,
Yeah.
old school analog, real. That's what also happiness to me. So
Cool. Cool. Well, I know you as a LinkedIn B2B marketer. That's where I first met you at LinkedIn Sales Connect, God, 10, 12, 15 years ago, long time ago. But then I got to know you as a human being, and I'm like, oh man, this guy takes badass pictures. And so congrats on your book, first of all, because it's beautiful. Not only is it fun to read, but like the pictures are fantastic. But secondly, I gotta ask you first, dude. Like, how'd you get to be such an awesome marketer?
uh, well, thank you for the kind words. The book, by the way, it's a bizwar, and I borrowed this term, half business, half memoir, and so it's a bunch of stories, and there's some, of course, there's some lessons in there too, but it's about reinvention. It's about defining success on your own terms, and we can get into that later, of course. But I started off in the music business, and I worked at Sony Music for 10 years. I was in a heavy metal band in the early 90s, hair metal band that got wiped out overnight by Nirvana, and decided I was going to go in the music business and live vicariously through the artist. But I started doing marketing there, and watch this business sort of fight digital, and we saw what happened. We know what happens when people fight digital and disruption. And yeah, then I had to reinvent myself, and this is part of the story of the book. Change myself from a B2C marketer into a startup kind of marketer, and I started at Marketo pre-IPO, and to be honest with you, I learned at Marketo in 2012, the dawn of inbound marketing, marketing automation. This was where I got a PhD in all things marketing.
Oh
I learned
yeah.
from
Wow.
John Miller, Maria Pergolino. No relation, John. It's just a coincidence. But I learned more in 2 years at Marketo than I did in my entire life. And then that went into LinkedIn and so on and so forth. So just learning from others, never being the smartest person in the room, and constantly trying to upskill and be creative and different, I think.
Wow. Wow. So let's talk a little bit about the rock and roll years. So first I gotta ask you, do you love Nirvana or do you hate Nirvana? Or do you care?
Uh, well, it's I mean, who doesn't love Nirvana, right? I mean, Kurt's a genius. He's a great singer songwriter, and it was different. And was hair metal turning into something like a mockery of itself? Possibly. There was a formula. Maybe it needed a hard reset. I'm glad to see it coming back. By the way, I think it's coming back full force. I mean, quite right. Last week, Tiger Tails. I'm going. It never stops. Bullet Boys. But yeah, I was. We were sitting. I do remember this like it was yesterday. We were sitting around with our, in my band. I had super long hair, zebra striped spandex, and like some sort of fucking leopard headband. And we're watching Headbangers Ball, and I remember we're sitting there and doing whatever. And Ricky Rackman comes on and he says, "Hey, that was the #2 Skull Crush of the week. That was Motley Crue with 'Don't Go Away, Matt' or something." And he says, "We got a new band. We think you're gonna love them. They're brand new. They're out of Seattle." So he goes, "Something's happening there." He goes, "They're called Nirvana." and you could just see the looks on our face, like the color drained out, and we're like, "Oh man, this this ain't good." And then seemingly overnight, Poison, Motley Crue, Winger, I mean, all of them were just gone. And I was in the lower tier of the
You
lower
weren't
tier of
quite the
those
winger.
bands.
No.
I like, Winger gets a bad rap, but Kip's like a really cool guy. I've met him a few times, and I thought they had a couple of good grooves. And Rep Beach is just a beast on guitar. So, but what's funny is I went to see Extreme, who I felt kind of got unfairly sort of looped into that genre. They were actually doing some pretty cool stuff and like infusing funk into the music. It was just hard rock. And I saw them like a few weeks ago, and holy crap! I mean, this was like it was one of the best things I've ever seen. The energy, it was like we had transported back to 1992, and they were in the prime. Never seen anything like it before. Nuno Betancourt, Beast, Gary Sharon stole the show.
Wow. Wow, that's awesome. I really enjoyed Extreme when they came out. I mean, they Wholehearted, More Than Words were some of the big ones. I mean, they had some good stuff, man. So you mentioned the word bizwar, and I first heard that from JJ French at Twisted Sister. And I love that word, right? That makes so much sense. Did you get to see or photograph Twisted Sister?
No, they ended they had their 40th anniversary concert, and they ended before I got a chance to before I was
Oh,
actually photographing. But it's funny, JJ's a friend of mine. I literally just I have this is the book that I
yeah,
borrowed
Twisted Business,
Biswar from.
baby.
JJ was just in French. JJ was just in town a couple of weeks ago, and we went to Dishoom and had dinner. And I love his story. I was trying to get him to do the forward, but he had two other forwards, and but he did say uh, he would do it if didn't have something else that was lined up that he had to get done. So I'm grateful. He's a super cool guy,
Yep.
and the stories, man. He used to come into the LinkedIn office because I had him on the LinkedIn podcast.
Yeah, he was just on the street, man. He lived right there.
I love JJ, and it's funny because it was the old LinkedIn office in Soho, and I remember
Oh yeah.
JJ. I was trying. Long story short, Rebecca Lieb, you know Rebecca, right?
Yep.
She used to be at
I
the
know who she
Altimeter
is.
Group.
Yeah.
Brilliant
Hmm.
marketer. She introduced me, and we just hit it off. And it's just like and I'm like freaking out because this is one of my idols, right? And
Yep.
he came into the LinkedIn office and was just towering rock star of a guy. And I remember we went to the desk to check in. They're like, "Oh, sir, you need to fill out this form and check in." And he goes, "Just go get Jason."
That's
And
totally
it,
JJ. That's so
and
funny.
just it wasn't ego by any means. It was just like, man, no, it's not gonna
I'm
happen.
not
Just
doing
go
that.
get. I'm just
Yeah.
here to see Jason.
Hmm. That's funny. That's so cool, man. That's so cool. So I got to ask before we kind of shift into the kind of maybe a little more of your backstory. Do you have a favorite band that you've photographed or that you always wanted to? Maybe.
Well, I was scheduled to photograph Motorhead before the
Oh, before
untimely
Lemmy
passing
died.
of Lemmy, and it just never happened. But if I talk about favorites, I mean, like the, Cheap Trick is one of my all-time favorites. The Cult, even though the Cult hate photographers, they always make a shoot from the worst positions. I love the Cult. Warrior Souls, another band that was from the late or early '90s that they were like going to be the next Jane's Addiction, but they got kind of looped into this crappy hair metal thing. They're back touring again. Anyway, it's like it's like there's a lot of legacy ones. There's some big ones. I mean, I go to see shows all the time. So Filters play. I'm going to see Filter and shoot them tomorrow night. One of my all-time favorites. I'm kind of all over the place, but I love metal and I love really good pop with big hooks, like Jellyfish, Scissor
Yeah.
Sisters. So I'm kind of back and forth.
Cool. That's cool. That's cool. So let's rewind, man. Read your book, and I got to tell you, the way you grew up is amazing. Like the fact that you are who you are now, you got through a lot of shit, bro. So, will you share a little bit of that backstory for folks who don't know?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I always say, and there were several sort of lines we were playing with for the book, like a story that wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. I think that kind of sums it up. Like here I am, this kid who had some mental health. Not my, well, I guess we all have mental health challenges, but my mother was really sick, and she ended up taking her life when I was really young, and there's a whole story about why that happened and how how it affected me and my brother and the family, but it sort of set me off on this journey of like, here's this kid from nowhere, St. Louis, little suburb, um, you know, and I just kind of fought my way and never stopped, trying to get to the next level. Uh, and there's so many. I don't want to give away too much, but there's a lot of there's a lot of just like these anecdotes that happen to me that I look back and I can't believe that they happened and they happened this specific time, and it opened up the door to something else. But yeah, I'd say if I look back at some of the things I was doing in my teens and some of the people I was hanging out with and some of the places I was hanging out, I'm very lucky to I think, be alive, let alone have a job and had sort of a career where I can sort of choose my own path. That's the story, though. It's about it's never too late, and to start over, and it's never it's I guess the point is it's like Liam Gallagher says in the Oasis song, it's like you can have it all, but how bad do you want it? And I think if I feel like I've always been trying to catch up because I was always put behind because of something. And so I'm always trying to be creative and always trying to network and always trying to meet people. And I was very quiet, very subdued. But something happened over that time period. It's in the book of what triggered me to sort of open up and feel comfortable. And I think imposter syndrome, like everywhere today, and I think it's getting worse and worse with social media and whatnot. But the story, it's all these stories that come together that put together a path and a plan to where anybody can do anything they want to at any time from anywhere. If you just sort of, if you just take every chance that you can and you keep fighting.
Yeah. Well, you've taken lots of chances and lots of great pictures. Are you open to talking about the flying V and your dad and your brush with fame there? Because that's so interesting. Like I in Milwaukee, we had the Wade's guitar shop was like the guitar place, and I think Wade was a fairly decent guy, but then he divorced one of my friends, and that ended up being really weird. So, are you open to sharing that story, or is that book
Yeah.
only, man?
No, that's it's an interesting one. So my grandfather, when he was a kid, he walked past a guitar shop and he ended up buying one of only four original Gibson Flying V's in existence. One of the rarest, most valuable guitars in existence, right? And I think to this day there's like maybe two or three out there. JJ actually knows this whole story. He was like reciting it back to me because I know this story.
Of course he does.
Um, and it turns out, years and years and years later, my grandfather just kept this guitar and didn't really understand the value of it, but knew it was rare and it was worth something. So there's a guitar place in St. Charles where I'm from, and this he was a guy didn't really didn't have the connections he had after this incident happened. And he found out that my grandfather had this guitar, and so he said, "I got to buy it. It's got to be in my collection." Yada yada yada. And my grandfather said, "Well, if you give me this very specific guitar, another super rare guitar, and this and this and this, and discounts, and like he kind of worked out this big deal." And I said, "But you have to keep it in the store. You can't sell it. That's the agreement." And so they made the exchange. Dan couldn't find the guitar that he promised to my grandfather, so that was strike one. Strike two was maybe a month or so later, my cousin walks in to buy some guitar strings, and he looks around and goes, "Oh, where's the Flying V?" Because it was supposed to be, in the case on the wall. And he looks down, and there's a Guitar World with Eddie Van Halen on the cover, holding that guitar. And so, so Dan had sold the guitar to Eddie Van Halen for an ungodly amount of money, and then it opened up. He became like this exclusive rare guitar guy to all the rock stars, and he kind of just, screwed over my grandfather and pissed everybody off. And then but it was that one little story, that guitar, and I wrote a little blog post, and it kind of blew up. And nothing against Eddie Van Halen. I mean, I'm a massive Eddie Van Halen fan, but and I never asked for the guitar back or anything like that. But I just wonder if he ever if he ever knew the real source of where that guitar came from, the story behind it. And I don't think he did. And I think, obviously Eddie's gone and Dan passed away years ago. And it turns out after Dan's death, and this is in the book, I started getting letters from people about how shifty and how much of a swindler Dan was. And I'm going, man, I don't want to the guy's already gone. I don't want to but it just validated my feelings and it validated the story. But there's so much more to it in the book. And to be honest with you, it kind of cancels itself. When you think about the longer term story. But yeah, I still have the receipt, and my cousins told me all about this, and so it's just kind of funny how these sort of things happen and the way they do. So
Yeah.
I got a free guitar out of it. I have no idea where it's at these days, but that was it.
Yeah. So what guitar did you get? What'd you get?
Oh, I got
Something cool?
like a really shitty Gibson
Oh.
P bass, like a $200 bass. Like it was just
Oh,
crap.
gee. Oh, that's
So
unfortunate. That's cool though. Cool, man. Yeah, that's a great story. It's one of my favorite ones in the book for sure. So you talk about reinvention though, right? You went from Sony-ish to Marketo-ish, right? And that happened in LinkedIn where I met you. So what's the similarities? What's the differences between the music industry and B2B marketing?
well, it's interesting because to be honest with you, I didn't really know what the hell B2B was. When I went into tech, I just wanted to get into tech. And so I didn't really know anything, I guess, except how to be a creative, sort of fun, marketer, because that's how we were out with these bands and we came up with really fun campaigns, and we just wanted to build a community, put on a hell of an event, and build this band, which I guess you could relate to a brand. So the only three things that I think work today moving forward for B2B, ironically enough: events, community, and brand. So I guess it was maybe just I didn't know any better, and I brought this B2C mentality with me into a B2B role, and just started to have some fun with it. But there was an agency called Scorch that I worked with, and they're now like a partner agency, LinkedIn, and they won all the awards or whatever. But Chris, I think you met Chris before, Chris Bueller, who was my best
Yeah,
friend
probably.
and my college roommate. Uh, he worked at Interscope Records, and I worked at Sony, so we were always and we're the only two reps in town. So every time a band came by, we were out we were out every single night. And then after the show's over, we'd take the band out in the town. Like we did this like 5 nights a week, and then went to school, and then had two jobs. And anyway, when I went to Marketo, I remember they said we need to find an agency, creative agency. So I called Chris and I said something effective. Yeah, do you know anything about B2B marketing? He goes, never heard of it. I'm like, excellent, neither have I. Let's figure this out together.
Right.
And that
Let's
was
go.
and that was it. But we just brought this really kind of like B2B was very boring, and inbound marketing was just starting to take off, and there wasn't any of the personalities that you see, like yourself or the Jay Bears, or like I think Ann was certainly probably my biggest influence and the biggest rock star in B2B at the time. But there was I think it was just limited on the personality and the voices and the folks who were doing fun things in B2B. And to John Miller and Maria Pergolino's credit, they basically said, do whatever you want to, like just get people to like our brand. And no one had ever said that to me before, not certainly not in a B2B space. So uh, they gave us free reign to try anything we wanted to, but we had the software and the technology to tie it back and prove it was actually working. So it was interesting. But I think, and this is still true to this day. I think every time anybody starts a new role, they're kind of like, "What have I got myself into? I don't know what I'm doing." I mean, I feel like everybody feels that way. Well, in this case, like I really didn't know what I was doing, and I was nervous. But then, and it's in the book again, like thought leadership or whatever. We throw around this phrase, thought leadership, and I think you see, this is why I have a love-hate relationship with LinkedIn now. It's because I think people are doing it for the likes and the comments and the virality and the attention. And I think back then, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I think we were just doing it because we were just genuinely curious and trying to figure things out and help people. And I'm not saying that there's still, there's not people doing that today. Of course there is, but I think it's being overshadowed very quickly by the influencer and the going viral, and if I don't get 40 shares and go viral with a million views, then I'm not worth being in this conversation, and that drives me crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, that drives me crazy too. I'm glad to hear I'm not alone there. So with that, Jason, you are now in London, which
Yeah.
is super cool, man. So that's quite a shift from New York. So what's the time zone +5, right?
Well, I think you guys just did daylight savings,
Daylight
so it's
savings. Yeah,
it's
so
it's
we got
4 it's
11:30
4.
here.
Yeah, so it's
Okay.
4 hours, and then I think next week I think we jump ahead, so then we're back to the normal spread.
Nice. Nice. So what like London, man. What took you to London and what are you doing?
Well, it's funny because I was at LinkedIn, and I'd come over here for a conference. I was speaking at Ad Week London, I think it was. And I remember just being in the city at night with my wife, and I think well, we didn't have kids back then, but I remember walking out and just thinking, what a magical place, and just thinking, just being here and working at a company like LinkedIn. Well, at that time, it was still no one really gave a shit about LinkedIn. I mean, it's great to see like it just blew up beyond comprehension, and that's another story. But um, just being like this kid from St. Louis who barely made it out of college, barely made it out of high school, barely made it out of anything, is now in London speaking at some event on digital marketing. It's very intimidating, but at the same time, it's like, wow, what else could I do? And so I was out at dinner and drinks with some executives from LinkedIn, and I just said, my boss and whatnot, I said, if the opportunity ever opened up, I would love to move over here. And they started the wheels turning. Next thing you know, they created a role, and I moved over here and gave up my team over there. It was on a dotted line. Some of them are still there, funny enough, and helped to build out the team over here, and the rest is history. But yeah, and I love London. I just love history on our doorstep, and I love the fact that it's just a world class city, and I mean the music scene, as you can imagine, there's just so much great music. Everybody comes to London, and I have two kids who are growing up. Penny's 9 now, and Jackson's 5,
Wow.
and they're growing up knowing nothing but diversity. And when I grew up in St. Louis, well, there's no such thing as diversity. So yeah, it's it's unbelievable to me that I get to live in London and I get to do creative marketing things like and take photos. It's unbelievable to me.
Yeah. Well, a lot of that is because you're willing to take the shot. You were mentioning early on, right? Say yes to everything. You can do anything you want if you say yes to everything. So what have you said yes to recently that's maybe been a big surprise for you?
Well, this is something I was thinking about quite a bit, and I think there's this sense of entitlement that is hindering a lot of folks, and I think it's like exposure bucks. I'm gonna get a little controversial here. I like exposure bucks. Now, I don't want to sound privileged and say that I work for exclusively for exposure bucks, but you know, back in the day, like and I always get a lot of crap for, oh, you shouldn't talk about the way things used to be. It's not a good look. I'm like, what if they were better? In a sense, what if they were? Let's just, anyway, my point is exposure bucks. Everyone out there, I see these comments on LinkedIn. I see these comments everywhere, like, "Oh, if you want to pick my brain for 10 minutes, here's my invoice." It's like, like when I first started B2B, and I wouldn't be here today if I reached out to people and I said, "Can I ask you some questions or interview you for this blog or whatever?" Like they gave me their time for free, or at an event, like or like I used to chase Ann Hanley around and market profs saying, "I want a guest blog. I want a guest blog." I wrote so many blogs for free in my own free time, killed myself writing these things, did tons of speaking events for free, and everyone sort of like everyone seems to be afraid to do that anymore. Give away some of their time for the benefit of another. It's always got to be a pick my brain. Oh, I'll charge you this or whatever. So I think now, granted, some some folks, might have other circumstances, and this might not even be an option for them. But my point is that whole element of if you want to open up opportunities, you gotta work for free sometimes, and you gotta give some stuff away. And I think it drives me crazy when people are so close-minded to that idea. So anyway, yeah, that's kind of my bit about exposure bucks. And the other thing is I've shot a lot of concerts for free in when I first started out because I had to learn. I had to build a portfolio. No one's going to pay me to shoot. And then last weekend, Tiffany reached out to me and hired me to come photograph her at the 100 Club. Tiffany, the '80s pop icon. I got an I can't even find it here somewhere. I got paid for some photos and an album that just came out for one of my favorite bands here in the UK a couple weeks ago. And none of that would have been possible if I would have just been running around going, "Oh, I'm not going to do anything for free. I'm not going to work for free." So yeah, I see that in it just makes me crazy that if you have the opportunity to guest blog, to do some speaking for free, get out there and do it. Build yourself up, build your profile, build your relationships, build your network, and eventually, if you do it right, then the money will come around. But have a good day job in the meantime.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great lesson, right? We talk about reinventing yourself, which is evident that you do a lot of in this book. But yeah, I mean, sometimes the best business is to give it away because it comes back and it builds your portfolio and it makes, and you can experiment and do things that you wouldn't otherwise do if you had to get paid for it, right? Because then you have to sometimes prove ROI, which isn't always possible in some of these experiments. Is that what you found as well?
Yeah, again, I think the ROI comes after you cut your teeth, after you learn the skill, after you become, you know, um, good enough, valuable enough to actually charge for what you're doing. And I think no one pops into an industry immediately becoming an expert. I think it's funny again. I get on LinkedIn, and again, this is why I have a love hate with LinkedIn. I'm spending more time on Instagram and even TikTok more. I just think it's from a creative, it's more interesting. But every time I log into LinkedIn lately, there's someone who says I closed 87 deals in 30 days with AI chatbots, and I can sell it to you and show you how to do this. I'm like, like, why? Like, who are you talking to, man? Because do you know what a B2B like a B2B sales cycle is? You're not closing
Right.
87 of those in 30 days. And it's just like everyone's selling everything as it's so easy. Everything's so easy. Like, oh, you just need to use AI to do this. Someone was hawking a prompt they said was worth $10,000. They sold to an agency. I'm like, are you like, what is going on to where everyone has to sell you the idea that success is so easy and all you have to do is buy this AI program or whatever. And the question and what I think about is if it were easy, everybody would be doing it, right? It's not. Marketing is not getting easier. It's getting more and more difficult. And I was talking I was doing a talk 2 days ago. What did I say? Friday, 2 days ago at I was a closing keynote for Martech Copia. Amazing conference. And part of my talk was AI is not making things easier. It's going to make things more difficult for marketing to break through. I think we're going to have a content shock AI edition. Credit to Mark Schaefer, right? But all this AI stuff is going to be a lot worse before it gets any better because no one really knows what they're doing. Um, and the biggest thing for me, and this is critical. This is what I think a lot of young marketers are forgetting or overlooking is what's left for marketing to do? What's left for marketing to do? Because everybody is selling you an AI tool that can do it for you. There's strategy, there's big ideas, there's creativity. The fact that AI doesn't understand relevance yet at scale or in an empathetic environment is the only thing we have left to do. But the bigger fear that I have is I have a 9-year-old kid, right? Oh, I have two kids, 9-year-old and 5. And I have a friend who is an editor at a pretty big publication, a massive publication. And there's two things here. I kind of get so excited, I'm jumping all over the place, but I'm going to tie this back, Phil. Uh, my friend who works at this major news publisher. He said they're having trouble finding young journalists, like up-and-coming journalists, because all the local papers have gone out of business, right? So there's nowhere for these journalists to go cut their teeth and learn the trade and rise up the ranks. So there's a massive gap there, and I think what we're going to see is, Harvard Business Review just had an article 2 weeks ago that said the half life of a skill dropped from like 5 years to two, like because of AI.
Wow.
So yeah, so my fear is that these young marketers are like I did, Marketo. I feel like there's going to be a massive gap in that talent needs to fill, with no way of getting those skills. So again, communities, events, working for free in certain instances, like you got to figure it out. I don't know what the answer is yet.
Yeah. Well, I think it's host your own events, build your own community, right? I mean, that's really the key. And for find your passion and build it around that sort of stuff. And then hopefully, like just like you did, right? Something happens that you're able to then pivot into something that makes more business sense than not. At least that's what I think anyway.
Yeah, and the community aspect I think is key, and it's interesting. Again, not to pick on LinkedIn, I love LinkedIn. But when you ask a question on LinkedIn, it's a popularity contest to see who can have the coolest answer or who can link back to something of their own. If you ask the same question in a community, in a private, tight, well-run community, you'll get 50 answers from people who genuinely just want to help you, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the shift. I think if you are truly interested in learning and upskilling, like an athlete trains every single day for a marathon, you have to like that's the only way forward. Upskill, upskill, upskill. And it goes back to this. I don't want to sound like I'm ranting, but we had this concept called the hybrid marketer at LinkedIn that I talked about, and I learned from Marketo because we were a startup, and I sat in between PR and demand gen and product, and we were forced to work together. I was forced to understand these different marketing disciplines and how they fit together. So I felt like I had an advantage, and everyone used to say, "Oh, you're a jack of all trade, a master of none." And then you look at like what's happening today, and the specialists are the ones who are getting squeezed out by AI. And it's like they're called like a T-shaped market or whatever. And now it's like, oh, you gotta understand all these different things. I'm like, well, like you were the same person saying it was like I'm a master of none 10 years ago. So maybe
Yeah.
I'm that. My wife thinks I'm like that old B2B marketer who's like, get off my lawn. Uh, but it's not that at all. It's when I see something cool, I call it out. When I see something bogus, I call it out. I don't know any other way to do it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the reasons we get along so well because I feel the same way about that, Jason. I think that's so important. And to your point, right? I just read a book by Joe Churchillo called The Generalist's Advantage. That's all about being more of a generalist. And I think that's absolutely true. Super important to be, to have those skills and to have something that is valuable to people that can span across that T shape is super, super valuable. So with that, right, we want to reinvent. So do you have a reinvention coming up soon, Jason? Anything that you're working on that you're like, hey, I'm going to do this next and this is going to be a whole new Jason Miller or what?
Well, it's funny because I was thinking about this, and I kind of I feel like I went through this reinvention exercise going from music business B2C into B2B. I feel like I went through it again, going from never picking up a camera to I would consider myself a professional photographer now.
Absolutely.
And then even writer, like I was a terrible writer. I literally barely graduated college, barely graduated high school. But I've written like 3 books now. And so the next thing, um, I mean, videos is super interesting to me. My chair keeps falling down. I don't know what the hell's wrong with this thing. That's why I keep reaching down here.
All good.
Uh, like what? Something hit me the other day. I was at the British Library, and it just dawned on me after being in the UK for 8 years that I can get a library card to the British Library, and I'm like, this is like I didn't even think about that. So I'm in the British Library, and there was a book called um, was it poems like half written poems or something, deconstructed poems, and I just found it fascinating. They took these amazing poems that were half written, and they had experts sort of pick them apart and critique them. And so I don't know, maybe. maybe I'll give poetry a crack. Who knows?
Very
But again,
nice. That would be fun.
never too late to start something new. And who knows? Maybe in 5 6 years, I'll be able to write a decent poem.
Yeah. Well, you'll do a poetry book, right? And then it'll be Third Skin. I think that's
well,
what you're gonna do, right? Just
well,
you know,
the follow up to Second Skin is called Alive and Amplified, and it's basically how to amplify yourself without being beat down by imposter syndrome, and finding
ooh,
your niche audience, right, and focusing on that. But it's shifted over to is sort of Second Skin, part 2, and it's sort of the reinvention stories of others, because I started collecting these and I couldn't fit them in the book because it didn't work. So I wanted to do a second part on, like, here's my story, right, with a bunch of anecdotes and fun shit from the music industry and LinkedIn and whatever. Uh, but here's a collection of stories and advice from other folks too, because I think reinvention, personal branding, I think those two are critical pieces, and they play into each other very nicely.
absolutely. So, Jason, if people want to pick up a copy of your book, if they want to get to know you more, if they want to understand what's next and a little bit more about events, community, brands, where would you send them? How should they connect with you?
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm on LinkedIn. I post there as much as much as I can, I guess. But I'm much more active on Instagram, at Jason Miller CA. You can get the book at my website, rockandrollcocktail.com. It's where we have a limited edition version of it. And then it's also on Amazon, and but we're only doing physical versions right now. And then I'm not even sure I'm going to do a digital. Like, it's doing quite well. It's doing better than I anticipated. But the other thing I'll say about the book is, it's I feel like business books, if you write a business book today, it could be obsolete in 6 months, or like people are like, I think you see people getting book deals and they're like, "Oh, my book's coming out of fall of 2026." And I'm like, "Man, wow, like, so much is gonna change."
Yeah.
So I think there's this trend, and my encouragement is, like, write a book no matter what the length is, whatever. Um, but my point is I think there's a trend towards, like, a collection of anecdotal stories. Like, people love these stories, and they love these little anecdotal stories about how they got from point A to point B, and the inspirational takeaways they could pull into to help themselves with. So, uh, I think my point is move quick. I mean, this thing took 8 years to write. But that's beyond the point. If I did it again, I'd write it in 6 months. I'd just crank it out. But, my point is, we all have stories, we all have these anecdotes, and I think you gotta get them out there, and if you can collect them into a theme, I think that's what matters most now. Like, it's these little collection of anecdotal stories outside of just general business advice, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Get your stories out there, break stuff, move quick, but go slow. Be intentional, right? And get a second skin. So, friends, the
And
book is great, right? I really love the book, Jason. Congratulations. It's beautiful. It's easy to read. The pictures are freaking awesome in it. And I can hear your voice throughout the book. So, congratulations, my friend. For those listening, get to know Jason. Go to Jason Miller CA on Instagram, or go to rockandrollcocktail.com. Get a copy of the book, get to know Jason more, and find him on LinkedIn. He's a fun follow when he does post. Jason, this is awesome, man. Thanks for spending some of your day with me. I appreciate you, brother.
Phil, always a pleasure, my friend.